All right, hey, going to talk about just some basic principles in terms of exercise specifically in the gym, and I think this is the foundation of one staying healthy, but also understanding how we are stressing muscles and how we are stressing joints. Ultimately, what this all comes down to is how are we applying force to the muscles and to the joints, right? And in the body, force, when we're talking about force, we're talking about the level of torque at a joint. Okay, so what I want to show you here is just some examples of what's going on at the joint that we're talking about and at the muscle that we're talking about. Because if you understand this, it makes it a whole lot easier to make modifications into an exercise to either bias the muscle or maybe to avoid a joint that is maybe that has been giving you some trouble. Okay, so basic physics here is all that we're kind of going to go through. What we're looking at is the force of the exercise, the force of the weight, and the moment arm. Okay, is what we're gonna is what determines the level of torque. So one of the easier examples is a shoulder raise with a dumbbell, right? Now, as I go through this range of motion, the torque at the shoulder, aka the force at the shoulder, is changing throughout this entire range of motion. Yes, the weight might not change, but as far as my shoulder is concerned, as I go through this, the weight is changing. And that's no different than in a squat or a deadlift or any exercise. And here's how that looks. If I start at the bottom of a shoulder raise, down here, there's no torque, there's no force on my shoulder, on my deltoid, because the weight is in line with my shoulder. Okay, so if I were to draw that, if this is the body and my arm is straight down and the weight's here, the distance between the weight, where's my blue pen? The distance between the weight and my shoulder is super, super small or right in line, okay? And so there's no force going through that shoulder. As I start to go up, you can see that you can just draw a line. This line right here is your moment arm. And so this is what is determining the torque and the force at the shoulder. So about midway up, I'm starting to get some torque, not midway up, but as I start to go up, I'm starting to get some torque at the shoulder. As I'm halfway up, there's a little bit more torque. The distance between my hand and my shoulder, when you draw this 90-degree angle, this distance is longer than this distance. And then lastly, when my arm is all the way up, that's going to be the hardest position. And intuitively, we know this, right? We know that this is the toughest spot, but this is why. And this is also going to kind of give us the framework for how this applies to other exercises. Okay, so now this distance, this moment arm, is bigger than this moment arm, which is bigger than this moment arm. So this is the easiest. This is kind of that middle of the ground, and this is the hardest in terms of where you're at in space, the hardest for the muscle, the hardest for the joint. So as that moment arm increases, we're increasing force, we're increasing torque at a joint. Okay, so let's look at some other exercises. Let's look at maybe even a bicep curl, right? So on a bicep curl, if my upper arm is straight down and there's my elbow and I have a dumbbell straight in my hand, again, just like in the shoulder example, because these are lined up, there's no force, there's no torque at my elbow, right? Which is why you can hold a heavy dumbbell right here. As we move through a bicep curl, then got the upper arm. As we start to go through it, we're right there. Same idea. We can just draw our lines, just a perpendicular line from the joint that we're looking at to the arm. Now we can see a larger moment arm from here. So we're starting to get some more torque, some more stress on the bicep. As we continue to go through that motion, once my elbow is at, say, 90 degrees, just like in that shoulder exercise, now my moment arm is the length of my entire arm. That's going to be the hardest position. Okay, so again, just like this example, this is going to be the hardest, this is going to be the middle, and then this will be the easiest or the lightest. If we keep going through that bicep curl and say now we go past 90 degrees and we start to come up higher, we're lowering that torque again. So now if we're going up here, you can see that we've now shortened this distance, and we're almost right back at this position now. Okay, so we went from easiest to middle to hardest to middle again. Okay, now without looking at muscle physiology and mechanics, that's how the physics of this all works. We're changing the stress, we're changing the challenge on the muscle depending on where we are at in space and how that relates to the joint that we're looking at. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's look at let's look at the squat and a deadlift just so that you can see the difference. You know, because why is a squat a more quad dominant exercise and why is a deadlift a more glute and hamstring dominant exercise? When you break it down like this, it's easy to see. So if I draw, see if I can get over here because this whole left-handed thing doesn't work on that side. So if I draw the squat, and I draw the deadlift, it's easy to see how this line of force, that barbell's on the back going through that midfoot, changes, right? So if we're looking at the glute, if we're looking at how much force we are placing on our hips, we just simply can draw this line and see that, okay, maybe 2/3 in a squat is going to be my hips. And then I've got another moment arm working and influencing the muscles at my knee. Maybe that's 1/3 working at the knee and the quads, right, in that squat. In the deadlift, though, we've pushed our hips backwards. Our shins are staying more vertical. Now this moment arm from the hips shows why a deadlift is working more hips than a squat, right? Because I've placed all that force, all that torque at the hip joint versus distributing it over the hip and the knee. It also kind of shows and goes to demonstrate the difference between squat patterns. If I want more quads, if I want more knee extension in my squat, maybe my knees come forward farther and maybe I stay more upright, right? Now we have a larger distance between that line of force and my knee joint. So we are placing more stress on the quads, more stress on the knee in this squat versus this squat. And then in the deadlift, we're focusing mostly solely on the glutes. Okay, so hopefully seeing this, relating it back to what you already intuitively know, and that's the fact that at certain points in any exercise, it feels harder. Okay, and it might feel harder because we are actually increasing the weight and increasing the load, increasing the force at the joints that we're working. Okay, that's the main point. But a big question we always get, and a modification that we will use quite a bit in the gym, is modifying even just a lunge. Right, and with the lunge, an easy way to modify is if I have my foot there and my shins here, and I'm back here, and I'm nice and tall. I'm going to try to draw this. And then this leg is back. You can see on here that a lunge in this position is going to put some force on that knee. Okay. What happens if in that position, we change where everything is at in space. What happens if our shin's a little bit more vertical and our leg and our body comes, our torso, I should say, leans forward a little bit more? Well, now just by changing that torso position and that knee position, I've removed stress off the knee and placed a little bit more stress on the glutes and the hips. Okay, and what that looks like is just, you can't see my legs, but if I'm here and my foot is out in front of me, my weight, my center of gravity is away from my knee. Actually, I drew these wrong. Right? Our center of mass is going to be there. Our center of mass is going to be there. This distance is smaller than this distance, right? So if I'm here, vertical, I'm going to get more torque, more force at the knee, versus if I lean over and I put more weight over my foot, that's going to force weight forward, which is going to place more emphasis and more torque on my glutes as opposed to my knee, okay? Push-ups, we can do the same thing. Shoulder presses, we can do the same thing. Arm exercises, core exercises, they all follow these same principles, but understanding that through the range of motion, we are changing the level of force and the level of torque at each joint lets us make better decisions in the gym based off of if we want to bias a certain muscle, or maybe if we want to remove stress off of a certain joint. Okay, so these principles, the physics of this is very important to at least have a basic understanding of, because it's going to help you make adjustments in the gym. It's also going to help you kind of think about exercises a little bit differently and see how you can set yourself up, whether it be with a cable, whether it be with a barbell, a squat, whatever the exercises are, and let you think through and modify exercises on your own. But it's also going to help explain why at the gym here, if you're in the gym, why we might move your body and you might feel something completely different. It's all we're doing is we're changing the forces. We're changing where that force is being directed or being biased, to get the desired result, whatever that result may be for you on that day in that program, to best get the results that you are looking for. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But just think force is essentially torque within the body. And so the longer that moment arm gets, the more torque we're placing on a joint and muscles.